Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, December 20th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about President Joe Biden and his chances at winning in 2024 against a potential Republican contender, and how these chances have been improving since the 2022 midterm elections, largely in part because of the results from the 2022 midterm elections. His approval rating is on the increase. His chances have increased tremendously in some battleground states that we thought would be solid locks for the GOP, or at least some significant locks in terms of victories. Competitive House races have swung back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, with Democrats winning about half of them, and altogether, the Republican Party had quite a poor showing in the 2022 midterms, which tells us that Joe Biden has an increased chance at victory. Now, over the past few months, President Biden's approval rating has been hovering around the same, but at different instances, it has been dipping into a point where there has been just single digits in terms of separation between the level of disapprove and approve across the country. Today, Joe Biden stands at a 43.1% approval, which is the highest point since all the way going back, all the way back to, maybe this is it. Nope, it's not it. It looks like 43.1% is even higher than then. I'm not even entirely sure. Back in January of 2022. So nearly a year later, President Biden is back to where he was. But the overall net here is about -8 to 9 points for President Biden, which is a significant improvement from his low back in the summer when he was down 20 points nationwide. This was definitely the lowest point in time for the Biden presidency, but I can't say it's exactly perfect. I mean, him being down 9 points means that there is still a significant portion of Americans that say, hey, we don't like what you're doing with the country, which means they may be open to choosing another option as we move on and on and on. But as President Biden is weighing a potential bid, it looks as if his advisors, top Democratic allies, have already moved forward with the assumption that he is, in fact, running for re-election. You see, the thing is about an incumbent president, you rarely will ever give up the opportunity to run unless, number one, you know you're destined to lose, or number two, there really is just no number two. You see, Joe Biden as an incumbent comes in with such a strong advantage simply because of incumbency bias and the benefit that you have as an incumbent. Every single president that has won re-election has won with a higher margin of victory than the one prior, besides President Woodrow Wilson and President Barack Obama. Beyond that, those who end up being successful end up actually doing better than they did prior to. And I think that could be the case very much so for President Biden, as we see now that President Trump is in the race, that he might be that Republican nominee for president yet again. The polling numbers don't exactly show Joe Biden trouncing him across the country, but they still show him leading when he's down 8 to 9 points. And one thing that we do know, stereotypically, about presidential elections is that the approval rating of a president will likely recover by the time you reach the election. We've seen it with the case with Obama. We've seen it with the case with Trump. We've seen it with the case with every single president that has come to a point where they've been disapproved of and then all of a sudden can recover it right in time for the election. A lot of that has to do with their allies and their party really doing a PR campaign, focusing and shifting the public narrative. It's something that you ask yourself, why can't they do it for all 4 years? Well, voters also start to pay attention more as they head closer to the election. People still very much check out from the news. If they disapproved of Biden 6 months ago, they probably don't have a different opinion of him now if they're not watching the news, if they're not watching how things are either happening or not. They may disapprove of him more or approve of him now, but if people aren't really as focused or invested in an election, the numbers become stagnant. And that's really what can explain a lot of this consistency between approval ratings in some of these off years and less important years for presidential elections. But we talk about the 2022 results. I want to show you what happened in the Senate elections. We know what happened. You've been watching this happen live, but the 51 to 49 advantage for Democrats really goes to show that despite having an unpopular president, the voters don't exactly reject you on that basis alone. Otherwise, Democrats would have been blown out across the United States. This wasn't a 2010 or 2014 wave. If anything, it wasn't even a wave at all. It ended up being a ripple at most for the GOP, and we'll talk about that as we continue on. But the victories for John Fetterman and Warnock and Kelly and Cortez Masto and Bennett across these states, Hassan in New Hampshire, these margins of victory were quite impressive. Ones that tell us that Democrats are well positioned for 2024 if they just continue the level of strategy and the level of campaigning. And especially given that President Trump was, in a way, the kiss of death for many of these Republican nominees. He propped them up on the Republican primary side, was the reason for their loss in their general election. But Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, even New Hampshire, even more so, I would just say in these 3 states, because these are the ones that were amongst the most competitive or viewed as the most competitive. He didn't really have much of a say in Nevada, though he was in support of Adam Laxalt. But Adam Laxalt was going to win that nomination regardless, and he was the former attorney general. So it made sense for him to run in that race. But Blake Masters practically came out of nowhere, defeated Mark Brnovich in the primary by quite a substantial margin, went to the general, lost. Herschel Walker ran against Gary Black. Not exactly the most well-known statewide figure, but nobody decided to challenge Walker because Donald Trump endorsed him in April of 2021, right after coming out of the presidency. Dr. Oz was handed this nomination through the endorsement. Dave McCormick, I think, would have won, and I stand by that. I think John Fetterman would have done very, very well. I think he would have gotten it close, but Dave McCormick, I can imagine, would have won over more voters. Maybe John Fetterman would have ended up taking it away, considering that Fetterman won by about 5 points, but I do see the argument here that a better Republican in many of these races could have substantially changed the outcome of these elections. I mean, it was still a year where the national environment was about 12 points to the right of the nation, where it was in 2018. About, let's say, based off the presidential margin, let's not focus on that, let's do a generic ballot, about 8 points to the right of the nation from where it was in 2020. So for these margins to be improved upon, it says a lot more about the Republican than it does the Democrat, but all around, kudos to the Democratic Party to do so well. In the House elections, we saw, again, a ripple across the United States. Democrats and Republicans flipped their numbers, eerily reminiscent of the 2016 to 2020 Electoral College flip, but this 222 to 213 was not at all what the GOP was expecting to get. Having net gains of just 10 seats across these contentious and battleground districts was not impressive, to say the least. The Republican Party, Kevin McCarthy, even the minority leader at the time, now going to be speaker, at least so it seems, was promising that there was going to be a substantial number of flips, saying that he can even imagine 50 to 60 flips across the United States, and he couldn't even break more than 10. A 10 net gain was a cataclysmic result for the GOP, given that this House election was practically handed to them. Democrats had a 5-seat majority across Congress, and yet Republicans were only able to narrowly grab onto that. And considering the House leadership, considering who is in the Republican caucus right now, I'm not hopeful. If I was a Republican, I don't think these votes would go the way that Democrats were able to whip them in the past. The Republican base is less unified than the Democratic base is, and what we've been hearing from the Hill and what we've been hearing from advisors is that Democrats are very much acting like they're in the majority. So what does this mean for President Biden? Why is this important? Well, it goes to show that voters don't reject the president on the basis of their approval alone. And I understand that Joe Biden wasn't on the ballot and that many more Republicans were as well, but I will say, unpopular presidents, i.e. Obama, i.e. Trump, have either done very well in the past or won in the past, and President Biden could very well do it as well. I think there is a very, very good shot that President Biden is able to defeat someone like Donald Trump if matched up against him, especially if it is Donald Trump, because this type of candidate has been rejected not only once in 2020, but again in 2022. The candidates that replicated and tried to mimic the former president lost because they were rejected before. And voters weren't exactly going to invite them back in, especially after all of this election denial, after all of these conspiracy theories, whatever it might be, the voters clearly were not happy. And I think that really, really showed as we looked into the 2022 results. So that's why I think, especially following the midterms, that his advisors are starting to build this re-election strategy because they know that if the midterms were a complete and total pushback against him, that his chances of running would be quite slim. He comes in with much more of a mandate now than he ever did before, and it looks like we might be back for a 2020 repeat, which Democrats wouldn't be upset with. They know that Joe Biden has defeated Trump before and that he can do it again. And considering that many of the states that Trump almost won back in 2020 have now shifted further left in a less beneficial environment for national Democrats, well, it tells them that if given the opportunity to run against him again, there probably will be more voters that swing back over to Joe Biden away from Trump. There probably will be Trump, Biden voters if given the opportunity, and I think it really will come out in 2024 in this potential repeat election. Now, there's no guarantee that Joe Biden ends up defeating, whichever Republican comes through. I think that his chances are pretty good against Trump, but I think against Ron DeSantis, there is definitely some concern there for the Democratic Party. But I still think that Joe Biden in himself, in what he has accomplished, in what the Democrats have done these past special elections and regular election, goes to show how Democrats know how to win. Democrats have given a new revitalized hope to their party based off these midterm election results, and especially going into 2024. It also cannot be denied that as the incumbent, he comes in with such a strong mandate that no one would challenge him in the primary. Of those who have publicly expressed interest, you have Joe Biden. Nobody else. And some of the top names that could have run have declined to run on their own accord. People like Kamala Harris, his own vice president, who people float as a potential successor to him. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of the state of Michigan. You have Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado, who did quite well. Gavin Newsom, who knows a bit of thing, about running a pretty significant state in terms of population, would know what it means to be on the executive side. You have many top names here. You go up and down the list. Amy Klobuchar, who ran for president before. Jay Inslee, who ran for president before. Al Gore, who ran for president before. Hillary Clinton, right? These top names that people might say, hey, they're considering a bid, are saying, no, we are not considering a bid. And many of them would have a good shot. Gretchen Whitmer, I think, would have a good shot. Jared Polis would have a good shot. Gavin Newsom, potentially, right? These people have a realistic pathway to victory, and if they are saying no, it's because they expect somebody more electable, in this case Joe Biden, to take their place. The one thing about politicians in America is that if they believe that nobody can do it better than them, they will put their hat in the ring. But if that isn't happening in 2024, it means that there is a lot of confidence in President Biden, or that the expectation here is that if you don't run someone, or if you run someone against President Biden, or President Biden steps back, it looks as if there's a fractured party. And I think one big thing that the Democratic Party is counting on, which I think also does in fact boost the electability of President Biden, is that the 2024 Republican Party presidential primaries is going to be a crap show. Right? What we are going to see here is that because President Trump is already in the race, that some others are going to either step back or they're going to challenge him. Unlike the 2024 Democratic primary, those who have publicly expressed interest is well beyond the former president. You have Liz Cheney, Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, Nikki Haley, Larry Hogan, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, top names you have already heard considered to run for president in the past that are still considering it, even knowing that Trump is in the race. Even knowing that Trump is in the race, even though some of them promised that should Trump run, they would decide against it. But I think after 2022, they saw what Trump Republicans were unable to do in these races, and they believed that a new vision might be there for the party. But the problem is that if they are running against Trump, Donald Trump is in this to win this. And if he isn't winning the primary, he probably is going to do a lot of damage throughout the primary process to whoever wins the overall nomination. He's already started to take hits at Ron DeSantis. He's been taking hits at Mike Pence. He's been attacking people like Larry Hogan. He's been going after Liz Cheney. A lot of these potential names here have already been slandered by the former president, and considering his base and how many of them will only turn out if he tells them to, they will probably look at this and say, if it's not Trump, it's nobody. Or Trump could very well decide to run for president as an independent should he lose the primary. I think it's a very, very decreased chance. I think maybe he would just step back and allow things to play out, but I don't think he would be super enthusiastic about running or pushing forth someone like Ron DeSantis, or pushing forth someone who he has already come out against in practically full force. And I think that boosts Joe Biden's electability. I think just the poor showing for the GOP showed them that the Trump wing of the party is no longer the future, but Donald Trump has decided to run, which means the party is going to be fractured. And when he decides to announce his bid for re-election, the primary field would be cleared. He would be campaigning for the general election, which is a huge advantage that incumbents have. He would be campaigning. Most incumbents win, by the way. I mean, it is very rare for an incumbent to lose re-election on the presidential level, but because they are so focused on the general election, because they have so much time to rather, instead of infighting, have a unified and consolidated party, can focus on the general election, it puts the GOP at a disadvantage, and it puts Biden at an advantage, and it's one that cannot be ignored. As President Biden weighs these potential plans, considers a final decision, it is clear that he has a good shot. And of those who might take his place, some of them have already said no. J.B. Pritzker is a no. Josh Shapiro just got elected. It's a no. Gretchen Whitmer is a no. Bernie Sanders is a no. Gavin Newsom is a no. Amy Klobuchar is a no. Jared Polis is a no. Kamala Harris is a no. And Pete Buttigieg, we haven't really heard from. But that's so interesting, right? You're looking at this and seeing that many of these candidates, the top 10, almost all of them have outright said no. And for the rest, it doesn't make sense. Why, as a cabinet secretary, would you try to challenge your own incumbent president or take his place instead of the vice president? And looking at many of these other candidates, they have already said explicitly, I will not be running for president. I was just elected to my gubernatorial, position or reelected. I'm focused on my state. I'm focused on this. And I think that plays a lot well for the voters. I honestly do. And I think for where we are right now between Biden and the dynamics of should he run, should he not, I think Biden stands to be the Democratic Party's best chance at winning in 2024, and I think after 2022, they know that. And I think that's why there's this conversation, and moving forward, I think the expectation after 2020 was that if the midterms went awry and the Democrats were blown out, lost 50 seats like Kevin McCarthy was saying, was losing the Senate 54-46 with Republicans being in the advantage, that's when they should have said, okay, Biden isn't our guy. But now his approval rating is on the increase. His chances at winning are on the increase. There's a lot more infighting within the GOP and a lot less certainty around their Republican nominee. Rasmussen reports the favorite pollster of Donald Trump shows Biden down just 3 points nationwide, and I think that's the start of a new trend, one that's going to benefit for the President Biden, one that's going to increase our understanding and expectations for 2024 and his chance at running for re-election, and quite frankly, it should. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2022 post-election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.